Thanks all of you for making time at the end of a long day of virtual interacting and learning for this conversation. Hopefully this is have some lighthearted moments and it'll be a little, it'll be a good conclusion to maybe the long day that all of us have had. Two things about kind of how this session is going to unfold. So we only have 30 minutes, so we can't do a ton, but there's essentially two parts. The first is a little bit of a framing for the conversation that I'm going to have with my friend and colleague, Tommy Scales, who's on the call with us. And you can see my cartoon rendering of him on our title slide. Thought we might need some levity at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Let me say something else about me in terms of owning my lenses, to use Christine's language from earlier today. So not only am I an outdoor educator, but my academic training is actually in philosophy, philosophical aesthetics. And so much of how I think about the work that we all do is influenced by those lenses. So that's just kind of a warning, just about how my brain works and how Tommy and I are going to talk to each other as we unfold. So Tommy, why don't you say hi to folks so people get a sense of who you are, as your bio is up on the screen now.
What's up, everybody? I'm Tommy. I am pumped to be on here. I'm gonna be real honest. I listened to what Sean said, but I didn't listen because I was there typing all of my friends that I used to work with. I'm like, what you doing? How you doing? I love you. But I assume what he said was important, and so I concur. But I'm happy to be here. I think this is such an important conversation, and I'm just excited to see people excited.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm just excited to see people excited. Everybody else is sad. I don't want to be sad. So I'm just happy to be here.
And thanks, Tommy. Tommy's bio is you can download it on the Whova app if you want to read it closer while I'm chatting here for a minute. So Tommy Tommy used to, and I still work for the CCO, which is a campus ministry based in Pittsburgh. And one of the departments of our larger organization is called CCO Experiential Designs. And our department does adventure ed, outdoor ed, experiential ed for college students all across the US. And one of the highlights for me over the last 5 to 6 years has been a 10-day river canoeing trip we do with a trade school outside of Philadelphia called the Williamson College of the Trades. And for those of us who know the WEA curriculum, the trip is very much built on the WEA model. We use leaders of the day. So it would be very familiar to a lot of us. But one of the things I've noticed leading that trip is that, and this is my observation, that as I've led this trip for 6 years, many of the African-American students are often some of the most resistant to participating, but by the end of the 10 days, they seem to be thriving more than many of the other students. And I've wondered, why is that? And Tommy and I have talked a lot about this. Tommy's led this trip with me in the past. And so that question has been like, why is that? Is there something unique about paddling that creates that kind of context? The student in the photo there, his name is Devonte. If we had more time, I would tell more fun stories about Devonte, but that smile in the picture was pretty typical for him after the first 3 or 4 days of that trip. So, and as I'm a philosopher by training, and so as I've been wrestling with this question of why did I see African Americans thriving, about a year ago, I read this paper by Willie Jennings, who's a prof at Yale, and had this quote: "The built environment presents to us a spatial pedagogy that teaches us not to see or to feel connectivity or to imagine relationality except in extremely constrained, controlled, and policed ways." Now that phrase, spatial pedagogy, jumped out at me. especially as he's using it here kind of negatively, right? That much of our day-to-day life in the built environment seems to, in his argument, constrain us in a way that prohibits what he calls this deep connection, which for him is part and parcel with, at least in the United States, our colonial heritage and our racist history and racist struggles that still persist today. And so that question in particular about spatial pedagogy, I began to wonder, is paddling different? Does it create a different kind of spatial pedagogy that, rather than diminishing an experience of connection, actually creates an experience that promotes connection, right? Because when we paddle, whether it's flat water, ocean kayaking, whitewater, right, you're always feeling inputs from your boat, your body, the blade, the current, the wind, your other paddlers. If you're paddling tandem with your bow or stern paddler. And so connections seem rife with the experience. And it reminds me of the way Albert Borgman, another philosopher, talks about what happens in the wilderness. He says, in the wilderness, the land, or in our conversation context, the water, engages not just our eyes, but all of our senses, and indeed our bodily strength, endurance, and our sense of balance. The wilderness engages us in all of our capacities, and we turn as we comprehend, and gather the wilderness in its extent and depth. So again, it's this sense that what's happening when you're paddling engages our whole bodies, all of our senses. And so because I love paddling, I began to wonder, is there something here that the spatial pedagogy of paddling creates a different context, in particular for African Americans, at least in the United States, to experience more connection. Another quote is by Tim Ingold, who's a anthropologist, and he's talking about wayfinding here, but it's the similar kind of connected experience to the environment that I'm trying to get at with paddling. He writes, wayfinding depends upon the attunement, I love that word, attunement of the traveler's movements in response to the movements in his or her surroundings, other people, animals, the wind, celestial bodies, and so on. And so I think I like that phrase when we're thinking about paddling, is that we're attuned to the water moving, our boats moving, our paddle, and it's sort of a heightened interaction with the environment around us. And so that brings us back to Jennings' argument that there's something about the built environment that reduces our capacity for connection and makes us more vulnerable to kind of racist patterns, right? In the built environment, right, it's pretty clear that it has certain kinds of prompts and boundaries that influences how we walk down the sidewalk, for example. We know where to walk. We don't have to feel much. We just follow the sidewalk if you're an able-bodied person with sight. Whereas, if you're hiking in the woods, those boundaries or prompts that you get from the sidewalk are not as clear, right? And so your attunement is looking for visual clues. You're feeling things through your feet, right? You're taking things in from your peripheral vision. You're turning around, looking where you came from. You may be pulling out your map and compass, right? So it's this deeper sense of connection. And again, so back to the kayak in my illustration, right? It's is the experience of kayaking, does it have clues that may help us actually pay more attention to connection in a way that could foster a more inclusive environment? That's really what Tommy and I want to talk about in a few minutes. To say it another way, to kind of wrap up before Tommy and I start talking, on the one hand, the wilderness, or what Borgman calls a focal reality or commanding reality, doesn't have the same clear-cut boundaries or prompts or affordances that our built environments often do. And so to flourish in a focal or commanding reality, one must be attuned to all of the connections you're experiencing in your body, around you, in the weather, the terrain, fellow travelers, versus the built environment, which is about making our movement predictable and organized. And for Jennings, it creates this sense of enclosure. And it's that enclosure that continues to break down our capacity to feel connections, which he thinks is critical to overcoming racism. So with that, that's the kind of the framing before Tommy and I talk. As I said, my training's in philosophy, so that's how I think about these things. And hopefully the illustrations were somewhat entertaining. But Tommy, so as we start talking, what was your first paddling experience?
Terrible.
No, what was it? Not how was it?
Oh, sorry. It was, I was doing a fellowship program for my previous employer, and they took all the fellowships out, the fellowship group out, and we did kayaking in Florida on the ocean in the Gulf. And it was really, really scary. Can't say that I was excited. I was excited to do something new, but not necessarily excited to do something that I might die in, or that's what I perceived. So it was a risk, to say the least, for sure.
Mm-hmm. As a side note, one of my favorite quotes from that trip with Tommy is on like day 3, he came out of his tent and he said, "What new thing am I going to learn today?" Mm-hmm. Because it was all new for him. I don't think you'd been to the ocean before. Is that right?
Nope, I haven't been to the ocean. My mother told me that if I didn't come back, everybody was getting cussed out. So, it was just, we were trying to do the best we could.
So you do this week-long sea kayak trip with us. What kept you coming back? Like to river canoe, river kayak?
I think that's such a good question, because it's something about when I did that, when I started to do stuff new that I was very terrified of. Mm-hmm. It's something about like learning that you believed a lie, that freedom gives you to try new stuff. Like the lie that I believe, just like, I'm gonna die. Like this is how black people die. Like surely this is it, And so like seeing that, not only that I wouldn't die, but like this is a part of creation and I have a part in that. It's like, oh, so I've believed a lot of lies about something that has caused me to miss out. And that's on me. And so I was like, and I think that's what really prompted like day 3 of just like, what else can I learn? Like, what else can I do now?
As you wrestled with the lie, what kind of helped you wrestle with it and say, yeah, I don't have to live into that?
I think it was the community that I had with me, of just like the care, the attunement that was given to me by the community that I had, of just like, listen, like we know that Tommy actually feels like he actually might die. But what small things can we teach him for him to get ready for the big things, and to do it with him? Like not to just instruct, be like, here's how you do a wet exit. Terrible, don't ever do it, messed up my hair, not a great thing. But then they did a wet exit. So it's like, how do we navigate destroying our hairs together? So, it's the community piece, I think, that gives like, oh, this is worth.
Yeah. Talk more about kind of you've alluded to it in your last answer, the perception of risk that you had to your body, right? And I mean, this is something you and I talked about the other day. This was new for me to hear from you this way.
Yeah. So the one thing I love about the XD department and the CCO that, almost started crying because I just miss them so much. When you're about to cry, you like catch it, you like hold up, straighten up, straighten up. The thing I really appreciate about them is like how connected they are, not only to creation, but like their bodies. And so going on these trips, being asked to do these things I've never done before was very scary because, and I mean, the year that we just had in America has not been an easy one with racial problems. And specifically with Black people and women and all people of color, I've always had to be aware of my body because other people have viewed it as something that's worth death. And so to put myself in a situation where my body is at risk on my own autonomy and authority, that's a bigger deal than I think people think. Like my body is constantly being threatened. And so for me to sign up to do that, that's a big risk. That's a really big risk.
Has there been any moments along the way when you've been paddling with us where you felt you could say the bodily fear that you once had wasn't there anymore?
I think what kind of set y'all apart is that there will be intentional conversations of like the debrief of what we did today. But I think what really captured my heart was when not only were we talking about paddling or kayaking or however you want to point it, but there was conversation was like, how do you feel about this country? Like, we're gonna do life. Let's do life. And so like, as there was a curiosity of my life, that enabled me to have a curiosity of y'all life. And then, y'all like the water, y'all like to be, doing, almost said the white people activities. We're trying to change that. Let me not say that. But and that allowed me to be like, surely I can be curious as well. So when you tell me that I need to put my paddle in the water a certain way, I'm going to put my paddle in a certain way because you asked me, you gave me curiosity. And so I will trust that you actually are for me.
That's good. How we talked about this the other night, you and I. What if paddling happens in a space of recreation? How is that space different from the typical spaces of recreation you had, say growing up? Or
and I think this is an answer of an example of systematic racism that none of us have started. Nobody on this call has started that. This is what people was like, here's what's happening. You're like, how? Here's an example is because with these type of activities, you have to know the people, you have to have the money to buy this gear so you actually won't die. And you have to have the flexibility of a good job to actually do that type of work.
Yeah.
Me growing up, both of my parents are divorced, single. And I didn't have friends to be like, hey, I'm about to go to Lake Erie, and paddle. And it's just not, that costs so much time, money, and concern. But I can go down the street at the park and play on the basketball court. Like that's free.
Yeah.
And if you're not grown up in a type of environment where you have those connections, I'll see you at the court at 7, but we got to be home by 7:30 because my mom won't come home. That's everybody else. So, access.
Yeah. I think that those are good insights, right? That the things that we take for granted as those of us who've grown up doing these activities, right? That we forget that there are boundaries and barriers that seem normal and neutral to us that just aren't normal or neutral.
And I will add a ask of like making like, so the ask that was asked to me is a big ask by my white brothers and sisters. It was a big ask, like how do we include? But the ask isn't enough. It really isn't. It's just not good enough. It's a great start.
Yeah. Say, how did your understanding of paddling, kayaking, or canoeing change after you and I had a conversation about the history of canoes and kayaks?
Oh, listen and listen well. That really changed the way that I viewed the world, because it's like, wait, we're doing something that indigenous people made? What? Like that's a game changer, because I think we all can attest to this, that our history teachers haven't done a great job. They really haven't. And so I don't know why, but I believe, and again, another lie, I believed that we were doing white people activities. What an insult to indigenous people. What an insult to all of us. That in my mind, that was automatically something that I could not do because it was white people activities.
Yeah.
That's not helpful for anybody. And so for me, having the, like, not the anger, but the longing for people to be curious and intentional about where I come from. How am I robbing indigenous people by not only not knowing that, but not participating in things that they did? And that's important.
Yeah.
So that changed. I was like, oh yeah, like I want to learn more. Like how do we do this?
Yeah. And I know for me as the white guy, like that isn't something I rarely ever talk about when I'm paddling with other white people. Right? I don't take time to explain the history of where the history of the canoe in North America or the history of the kayak. And so Tommy's helped me see that that's pretty important. What's different about moving your body paddling? What did that sort of open up for you or change what you paid attention to?
I think having the practice of like not having to worry about my body allowed me to see what I was actually doing. Like I think I've been reading this book called The Body Keeps a Score. It talks about when you're in survival mode, you have no capacity to care for others or to be like present.
Yeah.
Right where you're doing. And so to really like me having practice and not being and being in spaces where I don't have to worry about my body, I'm like, this is what like feeling is. This is what it means to feel. This is how it feels to feel, because I'm safe and I'm learning like, wow, look at this tree. Can we just take a moment to see how this tree is the biggest tree we've ever seen and how it soaks up nutrients and then somehow gives it to other plants and stuff too. Like, this is crazy. And so it's just like, I'm allowed, it's like, it gave me the freedom to be allowed to enjoy. It really did.
Say something about what the experience was like when you started to learn, say, eddy turns and peel outs in whitewater.
Now that's when it got fun. That's when it got fun. So like Paul, he better be on this call or I will definitely cuss him out live. I see his name. I'm glad this recorded. I said what I said. So he would call him like, we always have conversations like, how do we redeem some of the things that were made? So we called it like Tommy turns. And so, we would do those type of things. And I'm like, wow, like it almost felt like it was designed for us to play in. Like, here is a playground. No, you don't need no tickets. You don't need no money. This is designed for you to play. And I wouldn't be able to see that if I was worried about dying. I'm just not trying to play. This is not funny, you know? So, the Eddie turns, the Tommy turns, the Devontae turns, stuff like that. We renamed everything. And so it gave me the place to play. That's it, just to play.
It's almost 5:25. So if there's someone that wants to ask Tommy or I a question, either put it in the chat or I guess unmute and jump in.
Tommy, you need to be sure to look at the chat because you're getting all kinds of praise in there.
Y'all cussing me out in here. What's going on? Let me see. Oh. This is kind.
While we're maybe waiting for someone to ask another thing, Tommy, this is a new question. So what would you say to a fellow African-American male who was hesitant about trying paddling, whether it's kayaking, canoeing?
That's good. I think I will first start off with the shame factor. Let me say more about that. The thing I think with, and of course, I'm not the Black delegation, right. I don't have that. I don't have that title, nor am I getting paid for it. So they like where I come from. If you do white people activities, you're shamed for it. They will shame you, and so you need to be aware of that. I would be like, bro, tell me where you come from. Have you done this before? How would your mom feel? Who knows that you're here? What have they said about that? Let's talk. Let's start there. And then I think the relationship piece enables people to risk. It really does. And so I will first do inventory, like, where do you come from? Who knows that you're here? How do you feel about being here? How do you feel about people know and see that you are here? What does that mean about you? And so to debunk that type of things really allows people of color, specifically Black people, to express the shame that they might feel from doing white people activities, which is harmful for everybody.
All right, here's a good question from somebody in the chat.
Okay.
What did the discovery or ability to play in a new environment do to you, Tommy?
Oh, it's so annoying. Can we skip that one? What's going on?
That's a good question.
It is a good question. He just mad. He just don't want me to cuss him out live. That's why he's saying that. So what did the discovery ability to play in an environment do for Tommy? I think it debunked the lie for me that the world isn't as scary as it feels. And that I'm allowed to be here. Even though it's a majority white spaces, I'm allowed to be here. I'm allowed. I think that's the biggest thing. It taught me that I'm allowed.
Yeah. What are the types of connections, Tommy, that you've either noticed, felt, either when you've been paddling or reflecting back upon paddling experiences?
I think it's just the connection piece for me. I feel like once you do something, when you're around people, so it's this thing called trauma bonds where you when you have a shared experience with people and you bond it because it's been so traumatic and hard. The opposite way of that, I think the experience that we had allowed me to really do life with y'all. Like I could really come to y'all like with some serious stuff, and I know that I will be cared for. Like I don't doubt that at all. That's why when you asked me to do this, I was like, sure, what time? You know? So it really enabled me to have, again, safety in a world that does not feel safe for Black people, or people of color, or women. So help, help.
Yeah. So someone's asking, Gabe is asking, Tommy, do you or I have anything to say about how we can help change the false perspective of white people activities?
I like you, Gabe. Great question. I would say telling the truth. And what I mean by that, I mean, like when Sean told me that Indigenous people made these things, that's where we start. Like, let's tell the truth. Now, let's also tell the truth what happened to Indigenous people here. Like, let's tell the truth. We're going to tell the truth, tell all of the truth, you know? And so that really, it was a game changer for me. It really was, because people need to know the truth. They really do, because they're not getting it at school. And then if they get it from the media, a lot of it is skewed as well. So we have to remember that.
Yeah. And I think for me, especially the question around the role of Indigenous folks, that's become part of how I teach now because of Tommy, right? That wasn't part of what I did when I introduced people to paddling prior to these conversations that I've had with Tommy. So I think that's, you know, that part of it is we as especially white males have to tell the truth too, that kayaking isn't ours. We're joining something that existed well before us. Yeah.
That's good. The partnership, that's huge.
Yeah.
That's good.